Hi, today we're at the High Performance Centre for Gymnastics Victoria, where we're talking with Alison Lyons, who heads up gymnastics development. She's also on the board of Softball Victoria and has some great opinions and discussion points around sports integrity, governance and general administration. Let's go have a chat with her. Alison Lyons, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for asking me to come along.
Now, Ali, you've got an amazing, excellent history. It's quite varied, but I'd like to start from the start, if we could. You're born here in Victoria,
Yes.
the soon escaped. So, where did it start?
So my parents are from the Yarra Valley, and they both grew up there. I was born there, and then when I was about 4 years old, they decided the Victorian weather was not to their liking, and drove the family up to far north Queensland. So I grew up in Port Douglas in the tropics.
In the sun. Very nice. And so I suppose you went through high school and did all those sorts of things.
Yes.
And then you decided to head south again.
Yes, so spent my time in regional Queensland growing up, which was an awesome experience, and definitely from a sporting perspective was great to be able to, really engage in sport because there's not many other things to do.
Yeah.
So I played a lot of sport growing up and knew that I wanted to be in sport. I often went away to competitions, just before exams. So sport took the priority over my learning at school. And so from that, after high school, I moved to Hervey Bay and I did a diploma in sport and recreation through the Wide Bay TAFE. Was there for 2 years. So that was a course that sort of took you in different areas in terms of fitness or recreational sort of roles. So I didn't really know where I wanted to be.
You didn't want to be an administrator or an instructor or a coach? Or
to be honest, at that time, the sports industry wasn't really...
What is the time?
Sorry, we'll give away my age. We're talking late 90s here.
It's just between us.
Yeah, okay, so I was in Hervey Bay from 97 to 98, and then, finished that. That was a 2-year course, and then decided to try my hand at personal training. Because, the sports industry, it wasn't a real thing at that time, even during my course, people didn't really talk about jobs in sports administration. So I didn't really know where I wanted to go with it, but I knew that I wanted to work in the fitness or recreation industry. So worked as a personal trainer in Toowoomba, didn't like being away from the ocean, so then moved to Daydream Island and spent 6 months as a recreational...
That does sound dreamy.
Yeah.
Sounds
19
amazing.
years old, living on an island, running volleyball games. It was a pretty tough life. But
Surprised you're not still there.
I know, there is a time limit to some of those roles though.
Sure.
And then from there moved to Brisbane, went back to personal training, working in the fitness industry, then moved to Sunshine Coast, continued working within the fitness industry, then started work within a golf club. So then started to become a little bit more exposed to sports administration through working within a golf club. By that stage, I was a little bit restless, I suppose, and thought, well, I've seen a fair bit of Queensland. Let's go overseas.
You've had enough of the beach. You've had enough of the sunshine. Let's go somewhere different. So where do you end up?
So I went to Ireland and, just on the usual Aussie working holiday visa, got a job in a pharmaceutical company in Cork in Ireland.
Very similar to Daydream Island and volleyball games.
Oh yeah, definitely. That was a terrible job. I hated it. It was really hard sometimes answering the phone because I couldn't understand the accent or who they were asking for. So that was a real challenge. The best thing about that job though was the canteen, because it was a pharmaceutical company. Like, they just put on the best spreads.
Good spread.
Yeah.
They weren't worried about heart disease.
No, exactly. So it was really good. So I was there for the summer and decided, it's starting to get cold. I don't know if I'm really prepared for this. And also I didn't really enjoy my job. Was thinking, okay, let's go back to the recreation industry. So I put my name down with a recruitment company in England and they were recruiting for jobs all over the world in recreation and fitness type roles. And they came to me and they said, "Look, we've got this great job for you. It's managing a gymnastics centre and helping kids learn how to move." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds amazing." No, I had never done gymnastics before. And I was like, "Okay, where is it?" And they're like, "Kuwait." And I was like, "Kuwait? In the Middle East?" And they're like, "Yeah." I was like, "No, I don't think so." So this is 2005. The Iraq War is going on. I'm like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do.
That's
But the more I looked into the job, the more I was like, no, this just aligns with all the things that I'm interested in children's participation in sport, trying to teach kids how to move, use their fundamental movement skills. And it's a bit of an adventure.
And you get a bit of sunshine again.
That's right. Yeah, can't complain about the heat. Oh, the cold, sorry.
So what was the role specifically?
So the company is called The Little Gym. They're a gymnastics franchise. They've got about 300, or maybe even more now, centres around the world. And they're based out of America. So very much an American franchise system. So Kuwait is well known for buying in American franchises. Then they bring in people to manage the centres. So I came in as a what was called a gym director to actually manage the centre.
Yeah, so you're pinch hitting for them. So you don't have this experience. You go in and trust the process.
Yes.
What's the... And it's Kuwait. Like, you are female in what is traditionally not really female-friendly environment, especially at that time, probably still. How do you approach that? Because I'd be concerned about that side of things as well.
I reached out to a lot of people, blogs, things like that, to ask questions around safety and what things I should consider. So I had a lot of support from other Westerners living in the Middle East. And that was a really great starting point because I actually formed some really lifelong friendships just through asking those questions. There was one Australian guy that was like, "Let me know as soon as you get here. My girlfriend and I will take you out for dinner. We'll introduce you to the expat community. We'll help you out." So it was a real great experience to realise what it's like to actually be a minority. And it really helped me understand about migration and how people, when they come into a completely new culture, how trying to surround yourself with things that are familiar helps you go through that process. So it really opened my eyes to what it's like for other people that might move to Australia, for example, from different cultures.
It's an important perspective, especially now in the current political climate in Australia with the Sudanese and what have you, being headlines. It's good to have that other side for a perspective. So you get to Kuwait. How long are you at this gym for?
So I was there for 2 years. Taught myself gymnastics. Taught myself how to do a front handspring. Now working in Gymnastics Victoria, I'd probably have a lot of coaches tear my technique apart. But I was just going off the resources that were available to me as part of the franchise. And brought in some great coaches. I had a Swedish coach, a coach from Bulgaria, a coach from Cameroon, a coach from Lebanon, and I had a swim teacher who I knew from Australia. I asked her to come over. So, built a team, and it was an awesome experience. Just seeing children from all different nationalities play together, work together, communicate together, and actually learn how to move through gymnastics. It was incredible.
So your split of time, administration versus hands-on with the kids and all that sort of stuff, what do you think that split was?
I'd probably say 50, definitely 50-50. So I was running the business as well as coaching. We worked 6 days a week. We had Fridays as our day off. So you would just...
Many would argue in the sports industry that they're still working 6 days a week here. So
slightly different employment laws, though.
So you're following the sun. You've obviously got a good spot of sun now. What do you do at the end of 2 years? Where do you go?
So after 2 years, I was like, okay, I'm ready to see trees again. I got a bit tired of my flip-flops melting in the sun. and thought, you know what, I'm ready for a change. I came back to Australia for a little bit of time and actually did some study. So I did a Certificate 4 in Human Resources. Just from my experience of managing a team, I thought there was a few things that I needed to upskill on before I took that next step. And then, so after a short time back in Australia, I then got another working holiday visa and went to Canada. And so I swapped the desert for the snow. I moved to Toronto, or Toronto, as you would say in Canada. And it was perfect timing because they were just opening up the little gym of Vaughan, which is a suburb of Toronto. So I was like, okay, here we go again. So contacted the owners, said, look, I used to run the gym in Kuwait. They're like, oh my God, we don't know what we're doing. We need you to help us. So I came on board again to help them
set
run
up
the
another
gym.
Yep. Excellent. And so how long did you stay there for?
So I was there for 3 years, survived 3 Canadian winters, loved it, every moment of it. Canada's a great place to live, and if you haven't been, you've got to go. Really great place. But after 3 years, without coming back to Australia, I thought, no, it's time to come back. I had been living in a share house with 6 other Irish people, and so I think it was time to grow up a little bit.
At least you could understand them by that stage.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Okay, so you came back to Australia.
Came back to Australia, and really struggled to get my foot into the sports industry when I came back. So I knew that I knew that I wanted to work in sport. I knew that I wanted to work in gymnastics. I applied for every gymnastics job under the sun, but I had a real hard time getting my foot in the door because I didn't have any Australian experience. And so then it was actually quite good timing because the Sports Commission were releasing a lot of participation funding to national sports organisations. So every national sports organisation was employing participation coordinators, and a role came up at Cricket Australia as a participation coordinator. So I managed to get a role with Cricket Australia doing that.
Fairly different to gymnastics. Cricket's obviously one of the top tiered sports in the country, and a lot of emphasis, social emphasis, as well as funding, etc., goes to cricket. How do you find cricket versus, if I can, a second tier sort of sport with respect to funding and participation levels? How does it translate?
It was really different, and it would have been very interesting to have done the reverse, to go from what is considered a small sport to a large sport, but I went the other way around. And so I probably didn't appreciate it as much working at cricket, just having the resources available to you. And now on reflection, I think sometimes when you don't have the access to those sorts of resources or the pot of money that or the other infrastructure in place, it actually creates more innovation,
a bit more hustle.
Exactly. Yep. And there's definitely, I found, particularly through a change period we went at Gymnastics Victoria, is that camaraderie of going, okay, we know where we want to go. We're all going to go on this journey together to get to that point. Whereas when I came into cricket, you probably didn't have that sense of we are all working towards one outcome. I felt like it was a little bit fractured at that time.
It's a big corporate, basically.
And like I was working for Cricket Australia, but as part of Cricket Queensland. So I really started to understand the structures in terms of national versus state organisations and the different pressure points that are there. So I found it was a really good experience and gave me great insight into the Australian sports industry because I didn't have that previously. I did find it frustrating because I was teaching like little preps how to bowl, and I was like, they need to learn how to do a cartwall first. They need to go to gymnastics first.
Because you understand body movement.
Exactly. And having that body awareness. I mean, if you think about I'm not a very good cricketer, but a bowling movement is a similar cartwheel movement. And so if you've got that fundamental awareness of how your body moves, it's much easier to pick up specific skills.
I noticed that with AFL, they often talk about Pendlebury and guys like that have come from basketball and they have better awareness. And I often think, coming from gymnastics, I played football with some guys that did gymnastics, and myself included, and I think gymnastics is totally underestimated with respect to just core strength,
understanding body movement, understanding how you can balance and all those sorts of things, and land and move more broadly.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I think that was one of the things that actually got me the gig at Gymnastics Victoria, because when the participation funding came through to Gymnastics Australia and they started recruiting participation coordinators, the CEO at the time, Kath Clark, she had worked in New Zealand with Gym Sports New Zealand, and they were doing a lot of work around fundamental movement and the relationship between rotation and how the body rotates and how that reflects in terms of body awareness.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of that work at the little gym. So I walked into my interview and started talking about the vestibular system and how important that is for children to develop body awareness, and how rotation, which we do a lot of in gymnastics, develops that system of body awareness. And I started talking Kath Clark's language, and she was like, I did the interview in the morning and I got the job in the afternoon. So
brilliant. You said all the right things.
Exactly.
So you then moved down to Gymnastics Victoria, back to the cold.
Yeah, so I moved to Melbourne, and I actually thought, because I'd always coming from Queensland going, oh no, there's no way I could live in Melbourne, it's too cold. But after 3 Canadian winters, I went, I'm pretty sure I can hack and I'm so glad I did. Like, Melbourne is just such an amazing city.
Especially for sports and all those sorts of things. It is, whether I like it or not, or others like it or not, it is a bit of a mecca for sport in this country.
Yeah.
So you get dropped into Gymnastics Victoria participation again?
Yep, back into participation. Yep.
Much different ball game, pun intended, than cricket.
Yeah.
We're in the high performance centre now. There's lots of mats. There's it's a different game.
Yeah.
So how do you approach gymnastics versus a ball sport?
Well, when I was with cricket, we did a lot of work within the school space, a little bit of work with the clubs and associations, but a lot more of the work was done within schools. Whereas when I started with Gymnastics Victoria, a lot of the work I did was making relationships with clubs.
Yeah.
I started heading, got in the car, drove all around Victoria, meeting the clubs, talking about what they're doing within their clubs and how are they promoting the message that gymnastics builds fundamental movement within kids. So I really started to understand the club landscape a lot more once I started working at GB.
Yeah, so I presume that a lot of what you learnt in Kuwait and North America is really interesting for gymnastics, because unlike cricket and a lot of sports in Australia, there's a combination. So of your 135 clubs, there's a bunch that are privately held and there's a bunch that are sort of community entities. Whereas North America seems to be, on the back of a high school collegiate system, more private focused. How do you find that mix in Australia with private held gym clubs, and there's a bunch of sports like this, like tennis, etc. How do you find that mix and handling that mix?
It's a really interesting space to work in, and I'm starting to see, actually I'll just take a step back a little bit, because when I first started working within sport in Australia, the Australian Sports Commission were talking a lot around sports having to start to think of themselves more as a business. And then when I started coming into Gymnastics Victoria and looking at the Australian gymnastics landscape, I'm like, well, that's what gymnastics does. We do talk about ourselves being a business. Now, when I first started at GB back in 2012, majority of our clubs were committee-run not-for-profits. Now, 6 years later, majority of our clubs are business-run clubs. So there's a business owner.
What percentage, roughly?
It's around about 56% are business clubs. And the more clubs that we have come on board are entrepreneurs coaches that are looking to open up a gym as a business and a lifestyle to support themselves.
I suppose there's a lot more of that. There's things like CrossFit, calisthenics as part of that is getting another run at it. And obviously gymnastics, like you see in CrossFit, the handstands and all those sorts of things. And again, it's just fundamental mechanics that would drive people to gymnastics. And, if you're bringing your kid up, why wouldn't you put them through a gymnastics class? So does that change the bent a little bit as well? Because it's more commercially minded, it's more sort of personal, it's not all about gold medals perhaps? Like, what's the...
Yeah, it is. It is very interesting because when you look at here in Victoria, for example, well, last year we finished the year with close to 60,000. I think it was 59,000 something members, and majority of those are, once a week participation members. So we're probably looking at around about 5,000 to 7,000 of being competitive gymnasts that do competition. The rest come to class once a week, twice a week to learn how to move and just have fun.
Yeah.
So our drivers are a little bit different compared to some of the other Olympic sports in terms of the club space. We still strive for the high performance level, and in Australia we're actually redeveloping our high performance system and trying to widen the base, so some of those kids that are only going once or twice a week can actually start to realise that they can
There's a pathway.
get in on the pathway.
Yeah.
But it's just we need to have that base of kids to be able to support our high performance programs. So when we look at a business model for gymnastics, the best model is actually to have women's artistic gymnastics and what we call GFA, which is Gymnastics for All, which is basically your recreational gymnastics. Having those two within a business works really well because you can have a base of kids that are turning up once a week, and you can have your competitive kids, and it's the kids that are turning up once a week that are helping support that high performance program. So that is a ideal model for a business.
And what about funding then, if we can go into the details? Because obviously the Australian Sports Commission recently handed down their new idea, their new model around a bunch of different things. A lot of it is focused towards participation and getting people moving again and obesity and all those sorts of things. And then they've got, I always think that there's a bit of a conflict or a grind between that aspect and then the gold medal aspect. And every 4 years being benchmarked effectively on the number of medals that get achieved. And, the rest of the world is coming up to speed because they're getting better furnished with their own coaching and resources, etc. How do you find the challenges in those sort of two funding models? Because I think there's some big differences with it all and subsequently challenges with it.
I think it's really great the direction that now called Sport Australia is taking in terms of participation and actually taking participation seriously. So when you look back, I think it was 2009 when the Crawford report was done after the Beijing Olympics, where there was a huge emphasis on we need to do more in participation, we need to do more. And ever since then, there's been a little bit more trickle of funding towards participation, but the powers that be that control more of the high performance space tend to come over the top of that and tend to, dictate, no, we need more money spent here. And it is a struggle to be able to realise, well, how do we actually support both of these models with such a small pool of funding? But I think the direction that they're taking of actually going, you know what, we need to take a step back as a country and reassess ourselves in how we measure success. Matt Scholes, who is a positive sports psychologist, he talks a lot about our drive to be the best in sport can sometimes be misleading based on historical results, because if you look at how successful we were back in the 50s, for example, the whole world didn't participate in the Olympics back then. The number of athletes attending is not taking away from the amazing achievements of our athletes back then, but it wasn't as inclusive as what the Olympic Games are today, for example. So you're not necessarily measuring
apples with apples.
Exactly. It's a whole different game that we're playing in terms of the high performance space. So I think for us to take a step back and go, you know what, the most important thing is that we actually have athletes that can achieve that high benchmark, that we can turn up to these events and represent ourselves in a positive way, but also that we're also celebrating the successes even when we don't win medals, that the athletes that represent their country and themselves in a really positive way, that are role models for other kids. The fact that they've actually factored into the plan the health and well-being of athletes, I think is so important. And it's nice to see that shift. And I think, I mean, there's still a lot of detail to come out of how the funding will actually be distributed. But I think it'll be a nice change and maybe a little bit more balanced in terms of that space.
I admired New Zealand sport actually when they came over at a conference and they spoke about actually the World Cup, the Cricket World Cup, and the way that the New Zealand players held themselves after they lost the World Cup to Australia here at the MCG was just amazing. And it wasn't just about the medal, it was more about being a role model to their country, which I thought was a different bent to what Australia, you know, we're very competitive people in the sports arena. It was just a different tact to it, and you can sort of see that with the way that Sports New Zealand's been handling it from an outsider's point of view anyway.
And I also think that highly competitive, we have to be the best, and you can't compete unless you're actually going to come home with a piece of metal, is a detractor for the general population to participate in sport. A lot of the work we've been doing with Vic Health over the last 6 years has demonstrated that, particularly around female participation. Women don't necessarily want to turn up and, you know, be told that they have to, you know, meet this benchmark. They've got to fit in everything else in their life to be able to actually exercise. So if we're always saying that, you know, you can't turn up or you can't compete unless you're absolutely the best, then that just makes people go, well, I won't even be bothered. And I'm going to go off and do something completely different and not engage in physical activity or in sport.
I think it's important that only 0.001% or something end up at the Olympics or something like that. And if you focus just on them, you sort of forget about the other 99%, which is a dangerous sort of game. So you've got all these varieties. So let's just stick with the different sorts of clubs that you've got, because at the state gymnastics conference a few months ago, which I attended, there was someone over from the US, from California, and she was presenting on basically commercializing gyms and the better way to market themselves and sell themselves. And, you know, gymnastics, I think in the US for women is the #1 sport or close to it. It's their netball basically. Everyone's expected to do gymnastics. How do you see the US system working in with the Australian way of doing things? Because I see that with a lot of these sorts of sports where there's this big disparity between high school collegiate stuff and private gyms versus this Australian mixed model. How do you see that happening?
This is something that we have worked very hard with our clubs over the last couple of years to change that mindset, that even if you classify yourself as a not-for-profit, in the gymnastics industry, you're not. Because we are a professional sport. We pay our coaches. Our gyms, whether they're a business or classified as a not-for-profit, have a payroll system that they have to support their coaches with. They need to comply with Australian labour laws. You know, we have a lot of business structures that need to be put in place to make sure that that can happen. And so it is very important that our clubs actually take the business structure very seriously. And the reason why we pay our coaches is because gymnastics is known as a high-risk sport. So you need to have coaches that are well-educated, that have gone through a lot of training to be able to deliver the program. We can't rely on mums and dads to turn up and volunteer their time to take a group for an hour the way some sports are able to do that. So we really had to professionalise our model. And so with that came all the other things, like, well, if we're going to pay our coaches, how do we actually make the money to be able to do that? So even if you classify yourself as a not-for-profit, you've got to think of yourself as being for-profit because you've got to pay your coaches, and you want to also be able to reinvest back into your organisation. So if you look around this amazing facility here, there's hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of equipment that also needs to be kept up to date. There's a lot of equipment maintenance that needs to happen. There's a lot of considerations to manage in that respect as well. So that has been a journey we've gone on with all of our clubs. And that's why we bring over the presenters from America that run really successful clubs in America to share their stories and teach our clubs about how they become more business savvy.
Yeah, right.
The interesting thing is, though, the last conference that we just held in July, which is the National Leading Clubs Conference, so the biggest clubs in Australia all come together. And from that, what we decided is that, you know what, we've matured as an industry and we're actually up to speed now with the Americans. So in just great. That short amount in 6 years, we're now going, okay, we've actually got industry leaders here that should be going to America to speak to them.
Amazing. Amazing. So talking continued success, you sort of touched on it. You've gone from, sub 60,000 to 70,000 participants, 14% growth. How did that happen? How are you increasing participation across the state?
So since I started at GV, we have had, on average, year-on-year growth of 10%. There's a couple of really good years there where we had an increase of 15%. We're now on track. We haven't reached it yet, but we're on track for 70,000 members this year, just in Victoria alone. The last count compared to where we were this time last year, we're up by 14%. Which in a junior sport landscape is quite impressive. I know there'd be a lot of sports out there wishing to be at that same mark. And I think there are a couple of things that that success is related to. I think the professionalism of our sport, the fact that mum and dad can drop off the kids, know that they're safe for an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, however long they're here for, that they're being trained by qualified coaches, and that they're in a professional environment does help. I also think the message around gymnastics teaching children how to move has started to penetrate, and people are seeing the opportunities of getting their children into a sport at a young age where they can actually learn how to roll and land and fall and coordinate their body, so that whatever sport they go to choose later on, if they decide not to stay in gymnastics, they've got that
it's an advantage.
Exactly. So that certainly has helped as well, in terms of boosting our participation. The thing that is holding us back is we need more coaches and we need more facilities.
Just to keep up
with the growth. Last estimates, which were only a couple of months ago, we have 12,000 kids on waiting lists in Victoria. So there's 12,000 kids that are not getting the opportunity to do gymnastics because the facility is either full or the clubs are just struggling to get keep coaches. Up. Amazing.
So I see this as well with the influence of things like CrossFit, speaking with calisthenics, and then there's I went to the national cheerleading thing with my cousins in that, and they all seem to be growing. It's kind of similar with gymnastics. I know a lot of girls and guys that did gymnastics went over to cheer, and vice versa, and all those sorts of things. How do you see all those things sort of working together over the next 5 years? If you're predicting, do you see some cross-pollination with resources or people, or all growing together?
I think that's definitely a space we need to do more collaboration in, is across those sports that are similar in that respect. We've also started a campaign here in Victoria to try and encourage personal trainers to come in as coaches, to recognise that, similar to the background that I came from, where I was a personal trainer and wanted to teach kids, this is the perfect environment for it. And also, I know a lot of personal trainers go into personal training going, I want to train athletes, and then you don't end up training athletes. Again, this is a great place to start.
Everyone's an athlete, Ellie.
Everyone. You're right. Sorry, I shouldn't discriminate. And so that's an area that we want to try and encourage people to say, look, if you've done your Cert 4 in fitness, there's an easy crossover into the coaching accreditations to try and get more people coming into the sport and realising that they can coach gymnastics. Cheerleading is a really interesting space. I think as of next year, so Gymnastics Australia did govern a portion of cheerleading. But I think as of next year, we will no longer manage that, just because of the rise of the professional associations that are there. They're really popular. They've got more direction in terms of where they want to go with cheerleading. And so we have found that quite a few of our clubs that have started running cheerleading are also joining those associations. So I think that'll be a good parallel for us to work side by side with those associations. The other interesting space is parkour. So FIG, the Federation of International Gymnastics, have announced that they are bringing in parkour as a gym sport.
Wow.
So for those who aren't familiar with gymnastics, there's actually a number of gym sports that we govern. So women's artistic gymnastics, men's artistic gymnastics, which are actually two different sports. They're different rules. Rhythmic gymnastics, trampoline gymnastics, they're our Olympic sports. Acrobatic gymnastics, aerobics gymnastics as well. And then we've got our recreational gymnastics. So adding on top of that, we're going to have parkour, which will be another gym sport.
Well, I suppose it's something that Red Bull has sponsored, and they've got amazing videos on it. If you haven't checked out parkour, I'd suggest you do it. Jumping over buildings and jumping off cranes and all sorts of crazy things.
And these types of boxes are great places to learn how to do that before you throw yourself over a cement
We'll be
block.
doing that after.
That's right.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's a really broad space. Gymnastics. It's really doing some good things. Let's change tact a little bit and go to when you enter a club and. Let's talk about administration and governance and those sorts of things. When a new club is setting up, how do you approach that conversation around governance? Because a lot of them are all about the maths, the numbers, and those sorts of things. And there's some really famous cases in Australian law about gymnastics treasurers running off with the money and those sorts of things. How do you handle governance and sport?
That's a really tricky question because, it's a tough one to go through. And I'm not going to lie, I enjoy working with all of our clubs, but the removal of the politics in the business clubs makes that process so much easier. So when you're working with a business owner that comes to me and says, I want to start a gymnastics club, I have the same approach with both entities. But when you have one person making the decision, or it might be a couple making the decisions, that makes things a lot easier than when you go down the path of a committee-run organisation. At the National Sports Convention a few weeks ago, Jenny Price from Sport England made a great statement about you can't make, or the best decisions are not decisions by committee, or something along the lines of that. Like, decisions by committee is difficult. So that tends to be a slightly different approach in the communication and collaboration between that group of people when they set up their gym.
Yeah, I heard that from someone in Football Australia actually say that the best clubs are dictatorships, they just don't know it. Yeah. And it's a similar sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's difficult because it's all about finding that leader that has that good combination of just a little bit of charisma, but also is collaborative, knows when they've made a mistake, and also empowers others to come on the journey with them. So
a leader.
So finding that very key person is tough to be able to do that.
Yeah. So how do you furnish people to sort of bring them on this journey? And obviously not everyone has all those facets one way or another. So how do you bring them on that journey and sort of...
So the first thing, and which most clubs would do, is look around your community and who's got the skill sets that you need to do. So you're going to need somebody who has that personality to kind of bring everybody together and we all want to follow. You're going to need that person that has a concept of money to be able to manage your books and your treasury and things like that. Someone who might have some experience in writing grant proposals or reports and good communication skills to go after the funding. Looking for someone who's got a bit of a skill set in marketing, sort of looking around your community to see who's got those skill sets. Now, once you've got that group of people together, the next step is actually to have an honest conversation around conflict of interest. Because I have found, and I was talking to a group of people that are involved in lots of different sports just recently about this, is that you go, oh my God, I've got the most amazing committee with the most amazing set of skills. And then all of a sudden they get on this committee and they lose all of those skills because they become so narrow visioned in what is best for their child or what is best for them or their team or whatever it is. And so the passion overrides the common sense or the business skills that they would actually have. Yeah. So you really need to be proactive and have those conversations early on and make sure you have a conflict of interest register, that you refer back to that you've got a code of conduct in place and you adhere to that code of conduct so that you can actually have those discussions and make smart decisions.
Yeah, that's really good. And obviously you're on the state body. How do you guys run yourselves? Because obviously you're spread across the state. There's all these different technical committees and what have you. How do they all...
So the structure of Gymnastics Victoria is obviously we have our members, which are, they're the ones that make the sport happen, pay the bills. We've got our office that does all the day-to-day operations. We have 13 technical and regional committees, and we also have our board. So the board obviously manages all of our strategic and financial decisions. In the office, we also focus on those strategic decisions and the operations of how those strategies are going to be implemented. And our technical and regional committees focus on the technical aspects of the sport and assisting in the development of our competition structures. So they're really important, and they are all built with volunteers and people that actually have really deep knowledge of gymnastics. In our office, we've tried to have a good balance of people that are gym heads and people that have other expertise in other areas. So we've got a nice balanced view in our office, but it's really important that our technical committees have that skill set.
So how you... because this is a common problem in clubs where you've got the old school, the gym heads that have a huge amount of information in their heads. How, is a good part of governance is getting that information out and distributing it or making it available in a transparent way. How do you guys do that in technical committees?
It has been a struggle over the years, particularly to make sure that flow of information and communication is coming through. There were times when you spent weeks chasing up the head of the technical committee and the minute secretary to get the minutes. That was, always a struggle to actually find out what's actually going on. We changed our structure a couple of years ago where we started using Tidy HQ. And that became a great foundation.
Yeah, that's a good tool.
If you're interested, I know a guy. But no, honestly, it's been a godsend because now us as the overarching body is connected to each of our committees. And so if you're at a technical committee meeting, the minute secretary is typing that into Tidy HQ, can save it straight away, and anyone in our office can go into Tidy HQ and actually read those minutes, so we're not having to chase anyone up. It's also really great, like if they're having a conversation at a technical level around, well, we need to have another judging course on because we've got this competition coming up and we don't have enough judges for it. They can tag our education team and our education team know, okay, we've got to follow this up. So it just helps with the communication flow. The other thing that we've started to do is our operations coordinator, Angelica Shu, she attends every single committee meeting. So her job role is structured, so she works weird hours because obviously sport's not 9 to 5, but she structures her workload around actually attending those committee meetings as well, so that if there is a question that they have, can GV help with this, or how does that work in with the strategy, she's able to answer those questions. So having the technology and having the person on the ground has helped us build that communication.
Yeah, I often think that meetings and seeing groups that run good meetings on a regular basis is often a leading indicator as to how good their governance is and communication is, because I think it sort of speaks to a bunch of those things. So going up to the next level, boards.
Yeah.
So you're on softball.
Yes, I'm a board member of the Softball Victoria board.
Yeah, so that's a different hat again.
Yeah.
Completely different from coaching kids to running clubs to running a state body. Now sitting on a board, different sport again. They've got their own challenges. Another Olympic sport. Well, it changes sometimes.
Yeah.
But how did you approach that position, or how did you get into that position for it?
A couple of years ago, I was at, I don't know, it might have been a Vic Sport, SRV or Vic Health thing. I can't remember what it was. But they were talking about the lack of female CEOs, and that a lot of women often come back and say things like, I'd like to be in a leadership position, but I'd be happy with the middle management or the 2IC role or that sort of thing. And I was like, I was saying that. I was saying, I don't know if I'd like to actually lead an organisation. I don't know if I actually want that much responsibility, but I could be happy in a 2IC role. And then after I heard that, I was like, no, why would I be settling for second? Why would I not want to be ahead of an organisation? I know where I want to go in my career now. So then once I'm making that decision, it was like, okay, well, what skill sets and what do I need to do to actually be able to get myself into that position one day? I've been really supported at Gymnastics Victoria by our CEO, Jamie Parsons, and by our board to help me on that journey. I'm now in a position at GV where I am in that 2IC role, Deputy CEO, and I have started to, learn a lot more around actually leading up an organisation. But I also thought being on a board would also give me a different perspective, because if I'm in a CEO role, I'm going to have to report to a board, and then, so what is that like? So one of my mentors, a wonderful man by the name of David Talala, he works with a number of different sports. He was on the GV board at one point. He was also on the Softball Victoria board. He does a lot of work with cricket. I had a conversation with him, and he said, you know what, I think softball's looking for somebody at the moment. Let me get you in touch with so-and-so, and we'll have, we'll see where we go from there. So he connected me with Jenny Halliday, who was the president at the time. And I just went through my history with her and explained what I wanted to achieve. And so we went to the softball AGM, and I was voted in.
Wow. And so how long have you been on the softball board?
Not next week, the week after will be a year. So
okay. And so what sort of learning curve have you had? Because I know running a board in a company is a different hat to being operational, and I'm sure it's no different in a sports body. And on a board, you're expected to be looking 5 years in the future, I'd imagine, and understanding what's up ahead for the CEO and management to execute on.
Yeah.
How has there been much of a shift with your mindset, or what you've had to be thinking about, or a few surprise moments where you're like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting that?
It has certainly helped me shift in terms of understanding that difference between strategy and operations. Sometimes those lines can be a little bit blurred, and they're often blurred in a committee-run club, particularly clubs where they don't have the ability to put in a manager, where the committee is actually having to be operational. So, it can get, those lines can be very easily blurred. So being able to step up onto a board and actually, step back and go, okay, I don't actually have to do the work. I need to have a conversation with Nick, who's the CEO of Softball Victoria, and actually have a conversation with him about how this is operationally going to roll out. But I actually have to start processing my thinking of going, okay, well, where do we actually want to take this? What are the risks that are involved? What are the financial implications? What happens if it does work the way that we want? Are we ready for that? What happens if it doesn't? Really to start channeling all of that thinking around and it has changed the way that I work at GV. I think I've definitely become a lot more big picture
strategy.
sort of view when I'm approaching projects at GV. I've also got to go, okay, now you've got to pull yourself back and actually do the work and stuff.
Roll up the sleeves.
Yeah, exactly. You go, okay, that's where I want it to go. This is now what I have to do to get there. So, yeah, it's been an awesome experience. Some of the surprises has been working with people that don't come from a sports background, because I'm pretty sure the board at Softball Vic are like, here she is again banging on about what they do at gymnastics. Because it's easy for me to make those parallels about, well, when we had that issue at GV, this is what we did and whatever. But it's been really interesting hearing really different perspectives from people that come from a marketing background or a business banking background and don't actually have any work history in a sporting organisation, but just have a completely different skill set and a thought process that is different from people that work in sport.
Yeah, okay. And so let's stick with women in sport, because I know in Victoria especially there's a big bent and more broadly across the country to have more women running these organisations and running boards. There's talk about hard quotas and soft quotas. Would love your thoughts on those sorts of aspects, and then obviously I'm a male, so there's the other side of it as well, like me wanting to get onto a board as well, understanding how all this moves into the future. So how are you seeing like getting more women onto boards and into these leadership positions? Is it starting to have an impact?
I think so. It will really notice a difference next year when the actual board quotas come in and see how different sports organisations deal with that. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. I think we just need diversity across the board. We need more women, but we also need more ethnicity. We also need more people with disability. We need people that represent our community. I was listening to Richard Feidler's conversations the other day with I'm going to stuff up his last name, George Maglaginis, who has written a book around how football can save Australia or something like that. And he talks about the Richmond Football Club and how what Richmond did in implementing a more diverse approach, how they stuck to their strategy, how they didn't get rattled, and sort of shifted in the way that they managed their leadership. And Peggy O'Neill is the president of Richmond, and she's the champion of female leadership. And I think that's what we need to have in sport, and in the general sporting committees also should be representing who are the people that are actually attending their club. We're in Victoria, in Gymnastics Victoria, we do have a lot of female leaders, which is awesome because we have a huge female participation base. And so a lot of women have stepped up to the plate to run gymnastics centres, to own businesses, to be on committees, to take on those roles. And it would be really nice to see other sports sort of look to the women in their organisations to actually give them the opportunity to step up as well.
Yeah, I often think that the more you can cross-pollinate your ideas and be challenged with traditional thoughts, so if it's you don't want all gym heads on the committee or on the board, you want people from other sports or other areas of business, law and accounting and what have you to pull you in different directions and really challenge strategy and approaches and things like that. Okay, let's talk about the next 5 years for gymnastics and for sport and for governance and administration. What do you see as being the sort of big challenges over the next handful of years?
It's interesting that you asked me that question because I've just started my graduate certificate in sports integrity at Victoria University and have recently completed an assignment where I had to compare strategies over time. And it's really interesting when you look at the direction that the Australian Sports Commission have set and how that has reflected in sporting strategies and how they react and change to what the Australian Sports Commission do. So I think it's really timely that the Australian Sports Commission, aka Sport Australia. I don't know when we start calling it Sport Australia. I don't know whether that's like now. Right. Sport Australia has put their plan out there, and I think we're really going to see a lot of national sporting organisations make some shifts in their plans that then will filter down to the state's plans as well. So the areas that have really come through in the Sport Australia plan is the participation, the focus on high performance around athletes and how they conduct themselves and health and well-being, and that sports are supporting them, as well as the huge piece that has been done around sports integrity. And again, it's like seeing a red, you go to buy a red car and then you see red cars everywhere. Since I've started this course, it's like, there's brawls in basketball, there's punches in AFL, there's people losing their jobs over personal comments. There's all these things that are coming up that are really topical and really come back to how sports conduct themselves in their ethics and integrity.
Wonderful. Let's leave it there because we're about to get kicked out by more participation with school kids coming in here. Thank you very much, Ali. It's been wonderful watching your journey, and I'm looking forward to the next 5 years plus along the place. And thanks to the high performance facility that we got to sit in today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Isaac. It's
Cheers.
great. Cheers.